ways, and today I'm giving you out. You can get it online actually.
I'm going to do
It's
that.
called odiada.com. You can see it here, and there's a nice little timeline. It's just reviewed, to really get it in our heads straight. What happened first, Purim and Hanukkah, and what they're about. And this is a timeline. It's a fascinating. The graph that goes up and down is the number of Jews, believe it or not, the amount of Jewish population. And we don't know exactly, but approximately. And we'll look at this chart again when we have a complete version of it. Right now, it's sort of lopped off. But what we do have is the first and the second temple time when the Jews are in the land of Israel. As you can see, the first big mountain, little mound, where the numbers go up is during, after the Exodus from Egypt to Israel. And then you can see at the highlight, you have the first temple being built, then unfortunately the division of the kingdom, and slowly but surely the numbers go down, primarily with the exile of the 10 tribes. You see what I'm looking at? You see where I am in the middle of the page? And then the destruction of the first temple is 150 years later, as I showed you yesterday. You can see on the bottom it says who has control over the land of Israel. So we saw it yesterday. We saw Egypt and the Canaanites. We spoke about the Hittites also, but then Israel and Judah, and then Judea and Assyria is the period till we get to the final destruction of the first temple. 70 years in exile. Good morning. Until they come back, the Jews come back. Here places Purim somewhere in there. The Jews are saved from a planned massacre even before the second temple is built. It's during the Persian era. It's hard to precisely date it. There's a big mess in terms of dating the Persian era in the Jewish sources. I think I mentioned to you the other day, the Talmud says that there were four Persian kings, whereas of course the historians speak about maybe about 14. So how do you crunch all that together? It's a sugya. Okay, it's a sugya means it's a topic that needs to be dealt with. Yes.
Apologies, this is a question that's being discussed in the past, or just
Sure.
my general undereducation. But what was like the catalyst or like the impetus for us to build the first temple?
So yeah, it's a good book. You should read it. The book here you'll find a little bit of the story in the book of Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
King David says, he creates and solidifies his reign over all of the tribes of Israel, and he settles in, and he's attracted to build a house for the Lord. Listen, there is a pasuk in the Torah that says you're supposed to build a temple, and so for all these years they had a temporary structure called the Mishkan. It came with them into the
tabernacle,
the
right?
Tabernacle, exactly.
Okay,
that's what it is in English. And it was in Shiloh, and then it was in a number of different places, but there was never ever a permanent structure. And so he felt together with establishing his reign and his kingship, it would be the appropriate thing to build a proper temple. However, the prophets, God says no. God, actually Natan, it's the name of the prophet. There was another prophet called God. You meant God.
I meant Hashem, yes.
Yes. The prophet Natan comes to King David and says, good idea. And you're right, but not you, your son.
But doesn't David get to lay a foundation or something like that?
So if you look in the book of Chronicles, which I said in many ways is parallel, narrative is parallel in many ways to the book of Samuel and Kings, there you have pages upon pages upon pages describing all of what King David prepared for the temple in terms of getting everything ready. He made out all the divisions of what every tribe has to give, and collected materials, the gold, the silver, everything. So King David really prepared the infrastructure, and King Solomon actually built it. So
and Chronicles was Divrei Hayamim.
Divrei Hayamim, exactly. So the impetus was to honor God and fulfill the commandment. As a matter of fact, at one point, King David, the expression that he uses, he says, here I am, sitting in a house of stone. Right, he built himself a palace. Now we're trying to uncover it in archaeological digs in a place called
Yerushalayim.
Inside Yerushalayim.
David City.
They called it City of David. That's right, the City of David. So we're doing additional digs always.
Where exactly?
Just last week is unbelievable. They found a little girl found a coin. You'd be excited to hear about this.
I know. I've
You've heard about it. Heard about it. Yeah.
I've already met her.
Nice find. Yeah, they've been digging a lot of different places, but what they do is when they dig out the earth, they take it and they sift through the earth.
Yeah.
And I've done that. Have you done that? You've been to the place where they sift
Not
through the
here,
earth and
but
you can look for it. You
I've
can
done
find it.
in the
It's
past.
amazing. Yeah. I didn't find anything really too significant.
Where
I didn't find a
exactly?
coin.
I'm scared.
This is a pure silver coin. They say was probably minted in the temple from the
I'm
reserves of
scared
the
if
temple.
I ever did that and I found a coin, I probably wouldn't tell anyone. I just keep it. I just
yeah.
submit.
Mhm.
I would just like submit it to PCGS for grading and just hope no one found out.
Well, I give you strength that your Yetzer Tov should overcome your Yetzer Hara.
Where exactly is the city of David?
The city of David is right. You know where the Kotel is? There's a
Mhm.
gate there called the Dung Gate, Sharash Patot.
Yes.
And so you just go outside there and you turn left and turn right, and there it is. It's right opposite outside the city walls. In any case, getting back to our issue of building the temple, David says, here I am sitting in a house of stone, and the ark of the Lord is in a tent. Right before there was a temple, there was a tent. You with us, Jacob? So, you with us?
I'm looking actually at the chart.
Okay, good, fine.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
Let me see what else is there.
The Seder. So they built the temple. They rebuilt the temple, as you can see, and 160 minus 164. It says the rededication of the temple thanks to the Maccabean revolt. They skip over a lot of the, the Persian Empire conquering the Greek Empire, conquering the whole revolt of the Asmoneans. But you do see it on the bottom here. You do see it that there is the different periods. Ultimately, the Roman Empire taking over and destroying the Second Temple. But their estimation is that there were 4.4 million Jews at the time, which of course really
isn't that
fell.
what's the population of Israel right now?
Close to 8. Close to 8.
No?
Close to 8. Baruch Hashem. Yeah. Worldwide, we're close to 13 or 14 million. But that's the end of the chart, which is cut off. We'll talk about it another time. Yeah.
Apologies, this is again an off-topic question, but I noticed that on the chart we're looking at, it has rabbinical era along the x-axis.
Yes.
So what kind of determines the transition between rabbinical eras, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Apologies if it's off topic.
It's fine. It's all part of getting our bearings in Jewish history and understanding how it works. The stories that are told to us, like the story of the patriarchs, it's approximately 500 years before we get to the story of Israel conquering the land and the judges, and just from the timeline, the way it's written out in the stories. And then, of course, the kings and the prophets. Well, our tradition tells us that prophecy stopped at the beginning of the Second Temple era at some point. And after that, there's no more prophets. There's more rabbis. Here, there's lots of funny words for the rabbis. Tanaim, Amoraim, Zugot, we haven't talked about. We'll talk about them. We'll definitely talk more about this. But it's just sort of the way history worked, that there's different periods.
Okay, and there was no okay.
Yeah, there's no flag. Someone says, oh, well, we'll blow the whistle. Time's up. No more patriarchs. Now we're into judges. That doesn't work that way. No.
Okay, so it's much less defined than maybe
correct.
The chart. Okay.
Much less defined.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, let's open up our books to Hilchos Hanukkah. We're learning chapter 11, if I'm not mistaken.
What?
Zmanim, chapter 11, Hilchot Hanukkah. Be careful about the pronunciation.
No, I actually did not hear what the first word was.
Yeah.
So
We're up to page, if I remember correctly, we were doing through the historical background, appreciating the revolt of the Chashmonim against the Hellenists. And we're up to page 229. That's chapter 11, section 5, in the Pninei Halacha, chapter 11 of the Laws of Hanukkah, the book of Zmanim. So without further ado, I'll let you guys, I'd suggest to read from 229 until till 232. It's just about 5 pages for now, and then we'll go on and talk about some of the other practices in just a minute. Okay, so 229 to 232. Take about 7 minutes. We'll read it silently. Okay.
Starting with lasting spiritual accomplishment.
Correct. Section 5. Yeah. Okay, you guys done?
Yes.
Are you ready? Okay, so we're gonna discuss a little bit. I really think this is, section 5 and 6. Get to the heart of things and why we make such a big deal about Hanukkah. Yeah.
Just from what I was reading here, it's on page 230. It says we recite Ala Nisim and Halal to thank and praise God for saving us and allowing us to defeat our enemies. So do we say that for Yom Ha'atzmaut?
Some people have suggested that we should create a text for Al Nisim. That's the appropriate way to commemorate Yom Ha'atzmaut. I've been doing that in the last few years, off and on. It's a new style of commemoration. It's still debatable.
You do Halal as well, or no?
Halal I do, yeah. Halal I've been doing that. Most people do. A few are excited about the state, but you're right. It's a rabbinic holiday where we're celebrating miracles. The best archetype of such a celebration is Hanukkah, and so we should, just like in Hanukkah, there's an Al Nisim and Purim, so we should also have. It seems quite appropriate. There's problems with rabbinic power and making change in the Amidah in the right places. It's a little complicated, and that's why not everybody does that. But Hallel,
can you just stick it in the same place that it is for Purim, right there?
So you can, and that's what I've been doing, but not everybody does that because technically the Talmud says you're never allowed to add anything in the concluding 3 blessings. So and you're not allowed to pray for yourself. So these rabbis are suggesting, well, we're not praying for ourselves, and we're not really adding anything in. That's really the problem of adding things in, is that if you're asking for things, but if you're thanking, you're extending the modim. Essentially, you're adding into the thanksgiving. So there's a pretty good case for doing it, but it is a little bit of a newer.
But the
phenomenon.
It's not.
Hallel is clear. Hallel is mandated. This is really the headquarters of Hallel. If you look for the laws of the Hallel in the Rambam, where are you going to find them? Not in the laws of Shachrit, not in the laws of Rosh Chodesh, not in the laws of Pesach or Sukkot. You find the laws of the Hallel where?
I don't know.
30 minutes.
Hilchot Chanukah.
Oh.
It's unbelievable. Because it's a rabbinic institution. The Rambam clearly understands it to be rabbinic, puts it together with a rabbinic holiday called Hanukkah. Of course, we do recite it on the biblical festivals as well. But there's a machloket. The Ramban says it's a mitzvah d'oraita, but the Rambam clearly seems to indicate that it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and he puts it in the laws of Hanukkah. So Hanukkah is the headquarters of Hallel. We recite a full Hallel 8 days straight.
Yeah. The
only time we do that otherwise is Sukkot. Excellent. And we'll talk about, there might be a connection between Sukkot and Hanukkah. We might talk about that maybe next week on our Tiyul.
Perfect.
Preparing a shir.
Wait, you're coming?
I'm hoping to come for part of it.
That's exciting.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
I'm excited too. It should be a party. We'll work it out. In any case, back to our topic here.
Just to be clear, I wanted you to come.
Good.
I was like, it was like an exciting.
I know. I got that. That's great. That's terrific.
Okay.
I'm excited about your reaction. That's great. So the point of section 5 and 6 is really that what we're celebrating in Torah on Hanukkah is not just the miracle of the candles, and they lasted 8 days, and that's amazing. Wow, supernatural miracle. The truth is, we have miracles every day, right? The fact that we get up in the morning, the fact that the sun rises, but they're not supernatural. So you're right, that was pretty supernatural. Although, when you think about it, it was in the temple, and so the temple always had miracles. Our sages tell us that there were lots of miracles in the temple. So why do we celebrate this? So there's another aspect that you were saying Rav Melamed too is trying to juggle here is between these two aspects. He started off with saying major element of Hanukkah, the major big deal is that there was this miracle of the candles and the oil that lasts. And but then he's been talking about the revolt and the fighting and the war and the Hasmoneans' political struggle. So, and okay, we succeeded. So what are we celebrating more? Is it the military victory, or is it the candles, the oil that lasted miraculously? And his answer is
They're connected. They're the same.
close. What do you say?
We celebrate an everlasting miracle.
Good.
Those are
We celebrate
only
And what is that everlasting miracle?
that we have the same life that our ancestors have in the past.
In other words, good. You're saying right. Keep going. What do you say, Russell?
That during that time period, it enabled the formation of a Judaism that would last throughout the ages.
Good. Good. Essentially, what is the essence of Hanukkah then? Is it the
It's
miracle of
the
the
military
oil or the
victory
military
through-
victory?
the lighting the candles. The candles symbolize the victory militarily.
The answer I'm looking for is what we celebrate on Hanukkah is the Torah, the oral Torah. That is what the military victory enabled. Not just the supernatural miracle, but the oil represents the Torah. The Torah meaning, in this case, not the 5 books, it meaning the entire structure of Judaism as we know it. It was, he goes on to how during this period, because of the victory of as you can see on your charts, there was a big upswing of Jewish population and flourishing in the land of Israel during the Hasmonean period. The Jewish people came into their own, really, as you could say, and were able to develop and almost even prepare for the long exile afterwards by creating what we know today as Judaism. So we're really celebrating the oral Torah. Written Torah we had before. The Tanakh was closed at some period before the Hasmoneans, the great men of the Great Assembly and so forth. Ezra, Hasofer, the scribe who came up from Bavel. But now, after the written Torah was canonized, really this is the introduction and the celebration of the heyday of the oral Torah. And that's Rav Melamed's approach, and I think it's true. It's very, it's only because of the Torah that we survived the long dark exiles. He says here on page 230. Yeah, Moshe, go ahead.
Do we know the exact year when Ezra the scribe slapped his hand on top of the Tanakh and said, "All right, this is it. This is
We
the
do
Tanakh."
not.
You know.
I don't. I don't think anybody does. Yeah, we know approximately when he lived, and the story of Ezra. You're studying it, right? In the Tanakh class with Rabbi Weinstein.
If I can say it that late, yes.
If you can say it. I hear it's worth it. Okay, so take a look at the footnote 5, where he tries to clarify this, and he quotes the Rambam. The Rambam. Let's start from the beginning of footnote 5, because he really raises a question, and the question is that I refer you again back to the beginning of chapter 11. We have the Talmudic intro to Hanukkah. Look on page 221. We'll read it quickly. You say you don't study Talmud. We're studying Talmud right here. It's from the Talmud, Shabbat 21b. That's part of the Talmud. 221. Everybody see it? Page 221. Read it for us, Shua. When the Greeks entered the temple.
When the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils therein. When the Hashmonim prevailed and defeated them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was marked with the seal of the high priest, but which contained sufficient for 1 day's lighting only. Yet a miracle was performed there, and they lit for 8 days with this oil. Another year, these days were designated a holiday, the recitation of Hallel and Thanksgiving.
Okay, so clearly the primary focus is on the miracle
It's the oil.
of the oil. Now, if you look at the Algenism Prayer, which we're going to do maybe later today in the other class, it primarily speaks about the victory. Now go to page 230 and read the footnote. Who can read for us? Footnote on page 230. Thomas, go ahead.
We express our thanks by reciting Algenism in the Amidah and in the Hamazon, which emphasize the victory over the Greeks, who wanted to make us forget the Torah and the Mitzvot. God came to our aid and delivered our strong, wicked enemies into the hands of the righteous few. Afterward, the prayer relates that they purified the temple and kindled lights. No mention is made of the miracle of the oil.
Isn't that surprising? No mention is made
One
of the miracle of the oil. This is the lit lights.
one prayer is for one, and one prayer is for the other.
Right.
The Hallel focuses on the miracle.
The other one's not a prayer. The other one's a passage in the Talmud. We don't never say that in our prayers. It's strange. Prayers They speak about the miracle, but they don't say what it is. They don't spell out that it was about the oil. So I'm a little confused. Which is it? The Talmud says it's about the oil lasted for 8 days. And then Algenism, which we actually recite in our prayers, speaks about the military victory. And so we celebrate, we give thanks.
Oh, if it wasn't for the military victory, you wouldn't have found the oil. So clearly, it's more important.
Yeah, exactly. They work together. Ultimately, that's the conclusion on page 231 at the bottom, underneath the line. It says this means that the miracle of the oil symbolizes the triumph of faith and Torah over Hellenism. And it is the basis for the fact that Hanukkah is a perpetual holiday. However, we would not have been privileged to receive the everlasting mitzvah of lighting the candles, or the triumph of faith, if not for the miracle of the military victory, the righteous defeating the wicked, and the other national achievements as described in the Algenism. Okay, so one leads to the other; they support each other. But one more thing, just to recognize how unique this is. The Rambam, in his introduction to the beginning of the Laws of Hanukkah, as you can see on page 231, it's the end of the paragraph. It tells you the source. MT. What does that MT stand for? Extra marks for somebody who knows what MT stands for. It's excellent. Russell?
Yes.
Yeah. Mishna Torah, which is what?
That was his massive work on Jewish law, covering all that was, is, and will be again.
Right, his attempt to summarize the oral law, and that's called the Mishna Torah, the repetition of the Torah, if you will. That's what the words mean. Mishneh. Here, much to Moshe's chagrin, it sounds like the word Mishnah, but it doesn't mean the same thing. Mishna Torah is the repetition of the Torah by the Rambam, written by the Rambam. There's another name for that book. Yad Chazakah, very good, the strong arm, and he has it's divided into 14 sections. Yad, 14. And which section do we have find the Laws of Hanukkah?
The first.
Nope.
Okay, I'm just guessing, spitballing here. The 14th one.
So if you just guess it, let it sit. The first three are Mada, then Ahava, and then Zmanim. Zmanim.
It's a section of money.
Zmanim talks about special days.
So the 12th.
Mada, Ahava, Zmanim, third out of 14. I just said Mada is the first, Ahava is the second, Zmanim is the third.
Oh, the
third book out of the 14.
Oh, I thought you meant the
book.
third section of the 14 books.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
The third book of the 14 books.
No, that's.
You got it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And there, it's interesting. He has a section on the laws of Sukkot, the laws of Pesach, the laws of, and then does he have a section on laws of Hanukkah? Well, this is the beginning. What does it say? Laws of Hanukkah 3, chapter 3. Pull out the Rambam. Pull out the one volume Rambam. It's right opposite you. Stretch out your arm. Left. That, the big one. Exactly. This is the entire 14 books of the Rambam in one volume. All the other editions, of course, they divide it up into many volumes because there's commentary, there's translation. We have the entire Rambam in English, by the way.
Okay,
Bottom two shelves over there. So you can see that this is the entire 14 books. Mishna Torah, La Rambam, that's what it says. And if you look for Hilchos Chanukah, they're hiding. They're hiding because
Where are they hiding?
In plain sight.
they're hiding because the Rambam doesn't have a standalone laws of Hanukkah. Matter of fact, the laws you can see it here. It's the laws of Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukkah. Both.
So the laws of Megillah.
Laws of Megillah meaning the laws of Purim. The laws of Purim and Hanukkah go together. The two rabbinic holidays go together. So the first two chapters are the laws of Purim, Megillah Esther, and only in the third and fourth chapters does he talk about the laws of Hanukkah. And so that's why the Rambam's introduction to the laws of Hanukkah, it's on our page in translation, we're going to read it now, is in the laws of Hanukkah, chapter 3. Chapter 3, it's the beginning. But that's where it starts. It starts in the middle of the laws of Megillah and Hanukkah that go together. It's very fascinating to analyze. The Rambam was a master, what's it called? Someone who makes a classification system. He's an organizer. librarian. He created the system. The Dewey Decimal System, that's nothing compared to what the Rambam did in his Mishna Torah, restating the oral Torah, which before was what was it? Right, in the Talmud, based on the Mishnah, that was the structure of all of the teachings. They were all in the Mishnah, the Gemara, 63 Masechtot and 6 orders. The Rambam said, good job, but we have to restructure it
He
to
did
make it more
the
clear.
Mishnah Torah off of Talmud Bavli or Yerushalmi?
Both, and other works as well. Everything up till his day, he tried to incorporate it and put it in one restatement of the oral Torah. Okay, so let's read the Laws of Hanukkah, chapter 3, paragraph 1 in the Rambam. It starts on page 230 in our books, in the footnote number 5, during the Second Temple. Russell, you want to read it for us?
Okay, what page was that again?
230.
230. Okay, so Rambam further emphasizes the national political victory. During the Second Temple era, the Greek kingdom issued decrees against the Jewish people, abolishing their religion and refusing to allow them to observe the Torah and its mitzvot. They did violence against their property and their daughters. They entered the temple, wrought havoc within, and made the sacraments impure. The Jews suffered great difficulties from them, for they oppressed them greatly until the God of our ancestors had mercy upon them, delivered them from their hand, and saved them. The sons of the Hasmoneans, the high priest, empowered the Greeks, killed them and saved the Jews.
Overpowered.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
They overpowered the Greeks, killed them, and saved the Jews from their hand. They appointed a king from the priests, and sovereignty returned to Israel for over 200 years until the destruction of the Second Temple.
I mentioned that to you the other day. But the Rambam writes makes a big deal about the sovereignty, which returned for 200 years.
What no one likes to point out is that the Jews were fighting other Jews. They were Hellenistic Jews.
Also.
A lot of them.
Yeah, good point.
Like,
Yeah,
wasn't it the majority of the Jews at that time
Listen,
were Hellenistic?
it's hard to know exactly, but yeah, there was a lot of that too. But ultimately, they were influenced by the Greeks, and our battle was not only for political sovereignty, but also for religious freedom, as the Rambam starts off. So you see, the Rabbi mentions also, he doesn't start off with the miracle of the oil. Rav Melamed at the beginning of chapter 11, he chose to quote from the Talmud about the miracle of the oil. Rambam talks about the political victory, the military victory, and the religious persecution, which that saved us from. Bottom line is, if you look at the top of page 231, Moshe, maybe read for us the top of page 231, above the line, from the top of the page, the ultimate.
I'd rather not.
Okay, you're not feeling that fine, no problem. Jacob, so you.
I'll read, sorry.
Over the years.
Over the years, it became clear that the miracle was even greater than originally thought. Not only did we manage to survive the torrent of Hellenism that inundated the world, but Judaism shattered through a long and complicated process most of the pagan foundations of Hellenism, the abstract belief in one God, ethical values, and the aspiration to fix the world, all fundamental principles of Torah, increasingly spread among the nations of the world, eventually becoming, through means both direct and indirect, via Christianity and Islam, the foundations of all good and beneficial aspects of human culture.
Wow, stop there. So basically saying that what we're celebrating is the impact of Judaism on the world. We celebrate the oral Torah. We celebrate, it's not just about some oil that lasted for 8 days. As great as the miracle is, it's supernatural, I can't do that. But what it means for us. And as great as the military victory is, I can't do that either. God helped us in both of these aspects of the miracle. But ultimately, when we look at the Jewish history in the big picture, what the central focus of our appreciation on Hanukkah, what we're saying Hallel for, is not this specific event nor that specific event, but the fact that, as he says here, this was Judaism shattered the ancient pagan world, and he's quoting the Rambam as a famous passage where the other religions, in some strange way, even though of course we don't believe in those religions, and they both reject many basic motifs of Judaism, Christianity and Islam ultimately are agents as spreading some part of the monotheistic worldview to the rest of the world. Before that, as he said, pagan foundations of Avodah Zarah was rampant, and Christianity
A little better.
yeah, more
But
monotheistic.
not really. It's better for everyone except Jews.
Or not for us.
Because
No,
the
not for us.
Christians just
Well,
massacre Jews all the time.
That's
Sure.
bad.
Do you know the joke as to why God created Mormons?
Why?
So that Christians would know what it's like to be a Jew.
Interesting. Okay. Good joke. Yes,
But
Jacob.
Mormons don't go
I just want to
massacring
clarify.
Catholics.
The
Protestants
Hellenistic
do that.
Jews, were they polytheistic, as in like, or they monotheistic?
We don't know a lot about the precise beliefs.
Because the Greeks were polytheists, correct?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
like how did that kind of clash of, I don't know, if we don't know, I guess we don't know, but
Well, listen, that's what it's about. This is what it's about. We're fighting, the Hashmonaim purifying the temple. They got rid of the idols that the Hellenists put up in the temple,
Mhm.
and they stopped the worship of the body and the aesthetics, and they've made clear that we only worship one God, and our goal should be to, as he says here, to benefit the world with Torah values. And so that really is the crux of the matter. Of course, the supporting characters for that oral Torah is the political victory. It is the symbolic oil that lasts for 8 days, oil representing, what does oil represent?
Right. Purity.
What else? Why purity? I mean, sure, there's
just
there's
kinda
pure
always
oil
have.
and impure oil, but why? What
Always
does oil represent?
Jewish people. No?
Maybe. So think about it. We don't get it because we're used to, when we say the word candle, we think of a stick of wax.
Yep.
In the ancient world, they didn't have that. It's a relatively recent phenomenon. A candle in the ancient world meant a bowl.
Mm-hmm.
The bowl is a receptacle for the oil. You put the oil in and you put it in a wick, and that's what lights. So the oil represents the content. The oil represents the spirituality that you're filling the vessel. The physical world is the vessel for the spiritual presence of God, for the values that God taught us to enter. So really, that miracle of the oil expresses better than any other miracle. Like I said before, in the temple there are other miracles. There's a miracle with the showbread that it remained fresh. Why don't we eat lots of bread on Hanukkah?
I like that idea.
There's sacrifices on the altar. Why don't we have a barbecue every day on
I like
Hanukkah?
that idea too.
It's all good ideas. So why did we get the dingy little candle instead of having a barbecue? The answer is because, at least I believe, this makes sense, that the oil, more than any other miracle, represents this idea that the spiritual content is what we're celebrating. It's the victory of, and it does. Light is many times used as a metaphor for spirituality, right? The light that, and of course, we're in the darkest times of the winter. It's a little early this year. We're not quite this year. We're still in November, beginning of December, but usually it really happens. It falls in the darkest, shortest day of the year type of time, and we need more light to light up the dark. So if you look on page 232 in the middle of the page, I'll just read a little bit. Hanukkah is the celebration of the oral Torah.
Mm-hmm.
First, this holiday was established by the sages, the founders of the oral Torah. Second, the mitzvah of lighting the candles was one of the first mitzvot the sages enacted. But beyond these reasons, the holiday of Hanukkah is a general expression of the essence of the oral Torah. During, going to answer Yaakov's comments before, during the first temple era, prophecy abounded among the Jewish people, and they studied the written Torah primarily. After the temple or they actually heard the voices of the prophets themselves. But after the temple was destroyed and prophecy ceased, however, the time came for the oral Torah to take precedence. The oral Torah reveals the high stature of the Jewish people who share in revealing the Torah's light. It's not just, you could say that in many ways, that the written Torah is the words of God, and the oral Torah is the word of God through man. Ultimately, there were prophets for the written Torah too, but the prophet perhaps was just speaking, being an instrument, a vessel for God's prophecy to come through his mouth. We say something similar, but on a different level for the oral Torah. All these laws and discussions which the rabbis are having in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, and during the entire period of the sages, which we talked about after the Second Temple, we believe that they are sharing in bringing God's Torah, developing God's Torah out from the very basic principles. From some of them are traditions which they were passed down from God as well. And so really, this holiday of Hanukkah celebrates the oral Torah coming into its own. The principles were set in the written Torah, but the sages of the oral Torah paved the way for the realization of these principles. And the value of the written Torah versus the oral Torah, he gets into it a little bit, how each one has its unique features, and we need them both. But ultimately, at the bottom, page 232, the foundations for the methods of the oral Torah were laid during the Second Temple era, including all the enactments, safeguards, and customs, by virtue of the unique light of the oral Torah, which, like the Hanukkah candles, illuminates the darkness. We've managed to overcome all the difficulties of the exile. As I say, really, Judaism as we know it was created during this time by virtue of the oral Torah, which was developed, and that is really what's symbolized by the candles, by the lighting the candles, the light of the Torah, the light of the oral Torah, a continuation from the prophecy of the written Torah period, the previous period. But now we're going into, I call it the Golden Age of Judaism, right? This is really the birthday of
say that the
rabbinic
first
Judaism.
period under David and Shlomo are the Golden Age of Judaism.
I don't. I say otherwise because that's what everybody else would say, and that it wouldn't get your attention. But I actually want to make the point that people ask me also, what do you think? Or if you ask 9 out of 10 people in the world, what's the primary book of Judaism? What's the most important book?
Most people would say the Torah, but it's
Exactly.
the Talmud.
Exactly. You've been with me long enough. You've probably heard me say this before. I don't think that the most important book in Judaism it's the most important, but it's not the central book which you're going to get an understanding of what Jewish tradition is.
But
You can get some of it. You definitely get a lot of inspiration. It's as it says here, it maybe the written Torah shines brighter, like the midday sun. However, the light of the oral Torah is compared to the moon and the stars, and that really is Judaism that gets into everywhere, into all the little nooks and crannies of life, and that is what is expounded. The book of that is the Talmud.
But how could you
Right?
say that?
How can I? I can.
No,
I just did.
Not for the books. So just for this being the Golden Age of Judaism.
Yeah.
We're not Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael is one nation. Before with David and Shlomo and Mordechai and the Midbar, it's Am Yisrael. They're all one nation. They're united. They're not. You don't have people with this custom as opposed to this custom. You don't have this clash of different sects of Judaism. It's all one nation. So how could you call this the Golden Age?
You're not wrong, but because if I look at Judaism as a whole, and you're sitting in a library, right, surrounded by books which are bringing the Jewish tradition to English. It's the English library. But if you want to represent what Judaism has to say to the world, it wouldn't be enough just to look at the Tanakh. You can be quite misleading sometimes if you just read the Tanakh.
The difference is then they didn't need the Talmud written down.
The biblical era was different. I think life was different. The way people thought was different. The way we had prophecy. We don't have that anymore. So the majority of Jewish history, we don't have prophecy, even though it was a foundational period of Judaism. And you're right. That's when we had unity for a short time, but we had at least 12 tribes instead of, just two, whatever remnant we have. But in the totality, again, looking at the overview of Judaism, I think that the truer expression of how Judaism was lived for the majority of our history gets its fullest expression in the Talmud, not in the Tanakh. Again, the Tanakh was foundational.
Talmud was there to begin with. It just was oral. It wasn't written.
Much of it. It's a complicated topic about exactly how to understand the oral Torah and what parts of it are tradition and what parts are.
Rabbi Akiva and all of them, they weren't around, but
right.
It was still there. It was the same concepts.
So he speaks here very briefly. He tries to encapsulate it in a few sentences. It is something very unique about Rav Melamed's writing, is that he tries to really be succinct because it's a short book, but he tries to encapsulate the difference. And he speaks about the principles versus and the foundations versus the elaborations, which come later. Realization of the principles. That's what he says about 10 lines from the end of page 232. So it really got fleshed out though more in the later generations. Yes, Moshe, you wanted to ask, or you forgot already?
You went over, no,
Okay.
you went over it.
Okay. Other comments, questions? So far, so good.
I have a slightly tangential question. We mentioned earlier about the Hellenistic Jews who put up idols around the temple.
Yeah.
Were these idols of Greek gods?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that the fleshing out of the oral Torah during this era prevented the same kind of catastrophe that occurred during the first temple period?
Precisely. If you look at the footnote on page 231, he quotes a few articles by Rav Kook. At the bottom of the page, he writes that, if you look at the last 10 lines of page 231 in the footnote, he says, for more on this issue in the following discussion, see the essay in Orot entitled L'Malach HaIdeot, where Rav Kook explains that the Second Temple era prepared the Jews for the subsequent exile by absorbing the sacred vitality from the temple and integrating it into the oral Torah that accompanied the Jews into the exile. So yeah, there is this concept Rav Kook develops that somehow the sages were, the entire Second Temple period really was, they knew from the outset that this is not going to be the final redemption. The political sovereignty was not there. The people were lacking. There was only a very small group of the majority of the Jewish people remained in Babylon.
Yeah.
But the development of the state of Israel in the Second Temple period by the Hasmoneans, the state of the Hasmoneans, it really gave the Jews in Israel enough of a push and enough of a support to be able to create ultimately the Mishnah and then the Talmud. There were scholars of the land of Israel that created all that. And sure, there was also Talmud in Babylon, but the centrality of the land of Israel for developing this oral Torah, really that was the big accomplishment of the Second Temple period. It wasn't the temple itself, so much so that we all know that Herod came along and he renovated the temple and made it bigger. We talked about it yesterday, how they totally revamped the structure. But that was towards the end of the Second Temple. And it was for the majority of the hundreds of years, it was a relatively small structure and it wasn't that impressive. The great impressive palace-like structure was due to Herod, essentially towards the end, where the Romans were already taking over and ultimately they destroyed it. So we're not celebrating the Second Temple period because of the great structure of the temple, but because this facilitated this transition from the prophetic era, from biblical Judaism, which is many times called, to what we call today rabbinic Judaism. And that's what we're saying now, that the Hanukkah is really to celebrate the oral Torah. Yeah.
So, Greece conquered Persia, correct?
Yeah. The entire world, really.
Right. Which would include Persia.
Correct.
So, during the Purim story, we don't hear what goes on in Israel with the Jews that are there.
A little bit. There's
well,
hints
not in the
to it.
Megillah itself.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
And during the Hanukkah story, you don't hear about what's going on with the Jews that are in Babylon, which I would assume are also being controlled by the Greeks.
Correct.
So why does this holiday even apply to them? They didn't do anything. They sat back in their cushy chairs, doing whatever they were doing in Babylon. They didn't pick up arms and fight the Hellenists. They just sat there. So, or at least I would assume.
Interesting question. So
He does mention afterwards, after the Greeks were defeated, that they made Aliyah, and then there was a spur of economic growth and
right,
population.
as you can see on your chart that I gave you.
Right, but it
Second.
doesn't say anything about them picking up arms and joining the fight.
Correct. Good question. So I would clarify your question with saying, looking at the mirror image. Many times we ask, when it comes to Purim, we ask the opposite question. Purim happened in Shushan, center of the Persian Empire. It has nothing to do with the Jews in Israel.
Mhm.
And so they say that the rabbis, they tried to connect it by making the laws of the walled cities in Israel, dependent on when the cities were walled in the times of Joshua, even though that was hundreds of years earlier. What is the connection?
Yeah.
So that we asked the question, between the different centers of Judaism. This was a Galut holiday. And we come to Hanukkah, that's an Eretz Yisrael holiday. But we know there were Jews in both places, so really it's an interesting question you're asking. I think the answer at this point is because despite that the Jews remained in exile, they didn't really, they were not the center of Jewish history. Like today.
Exactly.
Today we have a center in Israel, center in New York, right? There's Jews, okay, a few Jews in Italy and a few Jews maybe in Alabama, I don't know, maybe one or two. But there are some leftovers in France, a couple 100,000. A lot of Jews, but the concept of there being the different centers of Judaism is not new. But in the Second Temple period, clearly the leadership that we speak about and the development of the oral Torah that we speak about with the prophets and with the Second Temple and with the canonizing of the Tanakh and the men of the Great Assembly, that was all centered in Eretz Yisrael. So it was
Right.
the headquarters.
It was, but
So, but Hellenism conquered, the Jews, I'm sure, in Babylon were affected too. You have a good point that,
but there's
the
no
Greeks.
there's no basis to say they fought back against it.
That's
There's
right.
no-
Our tradition
there's no
talks about the
basis to
revolt
say
in
anything,
Israel, right?
yeah.
And avoid by that the sons of the Kohanim in Israel. And we actually can go. It's amazing. You're in Israel now. You should go to the place of where we have the graves of the Maccabees. We have the sites of the battles of the Maccabees. We have long descriptions. I should show you. I have a booklet somewhere where it describes the 8 battles of the Maccabees. Really, it looks like a menorah. It's very cool. We didn't win all of them. It's
No.
unbelievable. Many of them,
We just want enough.
great leaders were killed. Yehuda was killed. Elazar. Has anybody been to Elazar?
I actually was there like 2
You
weeks
were
ago.
there 2 weeks ago. That's called Elazar, after Elazar, the Maccabean leader, who was a brother of Yehuda,
Mhm.
and he led the battle. Famously, he was killed, trampled by an elephant
Mhm.
in that spot in where you were visiting in Gush Etzion, south of Jerusalem. We have a lot of detail about where these battles took place and the ups and downs. Fascinating. Yeah.
Excuse me, my apologies, Rav. Could you please pass me a
My pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah, I'm gonna give you the full chart another day.
I'll post the link online where you can have the full chart.
Right, it's a link. It's not mine. You can even download it as an app. It looks like. Get it on Google Play. I don't know what you do. The app does. I never opened it.
One of the
Questions?
One of the stark contrasts that I see between Purim and Hanukkah, is whereas why Purim would affect the Jews living in Israel, is that when it took place, the majority of Jews were in Babylon. They returned, and enough of them returned to Israel. Whereas Hanukkah, they didn't all go to Babylon afterwards. The Greeks were controlling the area. Then they got independence, and then eventually the Romans conquered them. And they didn't go back to Persia. They went to different areas in the Roman Empire. So why? It just makes more sense to me why Purim would affect the Jews in Israel, whereas Hanukkah shouldn't affect the Jews in Babylon.
I hear.
That's all I'm saying.
I hear. Right. So based on what we said today, what we're celebrating is not necessarily the military victories in Israel only, but what that facilitated. And what that facilitated the development of the oral Torah, and our principles of faith overcoming paganism and the light beating out the darkness. That's a principle which applies universally. It's not so localized, and so that's why it did apply to
It was
all Jews everywhere until today. It does.
the Talmud Bavli, which is regrettably the more studied tract. How long did that last? Did it cease before Hanukkah, or did it continue afterwards?
It only started afterwards.
So
It only
then-
started hundreds of years afterwards.
Okay.
But we have, if you look on the page, you have the Tanaim and the Amoraim.
Yeah.
Tanaim, the authors of the Mishnah, is
Wow.
from 0 to 200, and the Amoraim, and the Gemara only started year 200. Right? If the Purim story, if the Hanukkah story is in minus 164, so we're talking about 364 years before the first of the Tanaim.
What are Zugot?
So that's an interesting topic, which I'd like to cover with you, maybe tomorrow. The Zugot, you can find them at the beginning of Pirkei Avot. So what I'd like you to each do right now is to, there's more laws. We're going to study the laws in the halacha class. In order to appreciate, really who lived, the sages that we're talking about, that, were able to develop the learning and pass on the tradition because of the Asmonean victories, they were known as Zugot. Zugot means pairs. The pairs, the best description of the pairs and who they were and what they taught appears at the beginning of Masechet Avot. Yes, question.
Okay, what is divided in section about the rabbinical era? Like to start with the first chapter with Zukkot and then Tanaim.
The historical chronological presentation breaks down after the first chapter. The second and the third and the fourth and the fifth chapter are a mix from different eras, but primarily the tradition of the Zugot is described in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. I'd like you all to do now, please. You get up out of your seats and find a copy or two of Pirkei Avot. Where would you find it? Where would you find Pirkei Avot?
I don't know. At my cousin's
Nobody
house.
knows. What is Pirkei Avot? I'll call it alternative name.
It's,
Masechet Avot.
Yeah. Where do you keep the Mishna Torah?
Behind you. There you go. 2 full columns. And if you look all the way to the bottom, you'll see some interesting additions. You too, Moshe. You're sick. Okay. Rest up. Find yourself a copy that you like of Pirkei Avot. There's many commentaries. They're all should be there in the Mishnah section. You got it right. Many commentaries have been written on Masechet Avot.
I just want to clarify. What's the difference between Pirkei Avot and Masechet?
Nothing. Nothing. It's the same text with 2 names.
Okay.
Pirkei means chapters. Chapters of the fathers or tractate of the fathers. You got one. Excellent. With a commentary of?
Pirkei Avot with an insightful and inspiring commentary by Rabbi Avram Tversky.
Of blessed memory. He passed away a couple months ago.
Oh,
Good. You have one copy. Good.
Which volume is that?
Volume 4.
Keep looking. I want to see what other ones you find. What other commentaries do you find? You got one with whose commentary you got there, Jacob?
I don't know. Russell gave it to me, and I trust him.
What? Oh, it's Phineas Kahana.
Open it up and look at it.
Pirkei Avot.
Why do you make these sources?
It says by Rabbi Pinchas Kechati.
I really like his Mishnah.
Is it Pinchas? Is that a name?
Yes.
Phineas.
Do you not
Phineas.
know the story of Pinchas? It's a good one.
I don't.
It's a good one. Pinchas is a very good Jew. In the Midbar. Actually, he gets his own parsha. Yeah. You know the story,
I'm
right?
saying that Pinchas in Greek is Phineas.
Pinchas. So during the time when the Jews are in the desert,
I bought it adjacent.
there are, I believe it's Moabite women who are causing the Jews to sin. It happens a lot. And there was one particular pair that were
I just read that one of the mitzvahs is not to allow Moabite women, not to marry them.
right. There was one particular couple of people committing adultery in public, and Pinchas takes a spear and he runs them through.
yeah, I remember. Okay, I know.
Take a look.
The man
First of all,
It's a good story.
this is a very popular. It was the only really English translation of the Mishnah for many years. It's called the Blackman edition. Rabbi Blackman put it together, and like every the 6 orders of the Mishnah includes Pirkei Avot. So in the back, it's the last Masechet in Seder Nezikin. It's the fourth
is
of the
Masechet
6.
chapter?
Masechet is tractate.
Tractate.
Tractate has many chapters within it. Yeah. And so if we want to all have the same edition, we can all pick up this and we could look at the same, same page. So hand these out and everybody turn to page.
Oh goodness.
Page 485. Everybody see this page? Do you not have one? Is there what? Are you missing one?
I don't think there was one.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. There you go. There's another one here. There's plenty of these editions.
Really, it starts on 489.
Copies of this.
The man who was killed was the most important.
You can see on the outside of it, it says Mishnayot Nezikin. Right? Everybody see that?
Mhm.
So page 480. Who
89
can read
is
the
when it
title
starts.
page for me? Read the title page, Thomas.
Machon Meir, Tractate Avot, being the 9th tractate of the 4th order of the Mishnah. Text, introduction, translation, notes.
By Philip Blackman. Right, exactly. And then you can turn the page and you can see a little bit of an introduction. And then you have chapter 1, Mishnah 1, Moshe received the law of Sinai, etc., etc. So this is a classic edition, but there's not much commentary. It's just a little bit. The one with the commentary of Rabbi Kahati, the one that Russell's holding, it has a much more developed. It's a modern day commentary. This was written about 100 years ago, and the Kahati 50 years ago. But he did a great job. It's one of the most popular editions of the Mishnah.
He died 50 years ago.
Right. So okay. So it was 75 years ago, whatever. But
I have the current edition. It's very, very tiny. Only 100 pages.
nice. You can get the
They make
entire
separate books of
commentary
just
on the
Pirkei
Mishnah.
Avot.
One second. You can get the entire commentary on the Mishnah by Rabbi Kahati
So it's only
online for free.
On
It's
the,
a Kahati app. I
on the
showed it to
Apple
you.
App Store.
You can get it on Google Play as well. Then there's individual books. This is Chapters of the Fathers with the commentary of Samson Raphael Hirsch. This is a commentary on Pirkei Avot by Reuven P. Boka of Canada, who just, I think, recently passed away, unfortunately. Then what you have, this is a 3-volume work, of which we have many copies, which is in the middle of the page. It's called Ethics from Sinai. That's why it's a little bit confusing title, but what it actually is commentary on Pirkei Avot. 3 volumes on this one Masechet of Pirkei Avot. 3 volumes, and we have a number of copies of it, so that we could also use. Let me see what else I could show you here. What other? the Rabbi Twersky, we showed you before. Here's another Ethics of Our Fathers, whose commentary is this. Herbert Goldstein, a British rabbi. Here we have the Birnbaum edition of Pirkei Avot with Hebrew and English. He's the guy who did the Siddur. Another one of the Hirsch. This one is Midrash David of Pirkei Avot. Who wrote that? Wow. This is in French and Hebrew, translated into French. A grandson of the Rambam. This is a very ancient one. This shouldn't be in our library. We don't like the French. I'm just joking. Then there's this volume, which is Chapters of Our Fathers, with the commentary of, translation and commentary by Rav Hirsch again. This is also Rav Hirsch, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Then this is the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim, you've heard of him? We talked about him a couple months ago. The author of the Mishna Torah and Chafetz Chaim. Here's his commentary on Pirkei Avot. We have many standalone volumes. This is two more Rav Hirsches. So we have quite a few Rav Hirsches as well. I think that's all. But anyways, tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to look at the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. Prepare. Your homework is to go through and try to see the different generations of the pairs, and we'll discuss a little bit of what they have to tell us, and we'll see if any of it is related to the era that we're talking about and when they lived. Okay? Yeah. Zugot means pairs, yeah.
Like the fruit or like pears, like
Like couples.